Welcome. My name is Ann Wheat. I serve as Executive Director for Duet, Partners in Health and Aging. We are celebrating our 40th anniversary this year of providing compassion, dignity, and hope to homebound adults, family caregivers, faith communities, and grandfamilies. Duet cares for family caregivers by offering help and hope to persevere through the caregiving journey, by offering help, special events such as this, along with virtual and in-person support groups, personalized information and guidance, and our video discussion series featuring Dr. Pauline Boss. You can find out more by visiting our website at duetaz.org. Thank you to our silver sponsor, Acadia Pharmaceuticals, copper sponsor, AARP, and media partner, Next Avenue. And thank you, caregivers, professionals in the field, Duet volunteers, and staff. Together, we all form a supportive community. Duet recently was awarded a federal grant to implement a national rollout of our signature program, Finding Meaning and Hope, based on Dr. Pauline Boss's concepts in her enduring book, Loving Someone Who Has Dementia. Her running theme is finding meaning and hope while having to live with the uncertainty and acknowledging the reality and beauty of the present moment. Today, she'll discuss concepts from her soon-to-be-released book, The Myth of Closure, Ambiguous Loss in a Time of Pandemic and Change. After delayed publication due to pandemic shortages, it now is rescheduled to be available December 14th. We are pleased to have Kathy Ritchie, editor with Next Avenue, with us as well to share her insights on her journey caring for her mother early in her adult life. Moderating our event is AARP State Director Dana Kennedy. She has been championing issues such as healthcare, retirement planning, and preventing fraud and abuse. Her focus with AARP includes helping people age in place, meaning living independently in their homes for as long as possible, and family caregiving. Given her professional tenacity, it's not surprising she is a marathon runner, swimmer, triathlete, and Ironman. Her personal caregiving experience goes back to her youth. Her great-grandpa lived in her family home till he was 99. Dana actually gave up her bedroom for him and shared a room with her mom. Thank you, Dana, for serving as our moderator and for serving as a tireless advocate for vulnerable older adults. I am pleased now to turn grief, guilt, and guideposts over to your capable hands.
Thank you, Anne. AARP and Duet are aligned in our mission to protect the elderly and vulnerable. We are proud to participate in today's presentation. Dr. Pauline Boss and journalist Kathy Ritchie have presented together previously. According to your feedback from previous events, the dynamic between them resonated with you, so they have been invited back together by popular demand. Also, as a result of your feedback, they will address guilt and grief, as well as guideposts for resilience. Pauline Boss is Professor Emeritus with the University of Minnesota. She is internationally renowned for her concept of ambiguous loss. Part of her groundbreaking research about stress reduction for family caregivers, she has worked globally across cultures, drawing from decades of clinical practice and personal experience. A Swiss-American English was not her first language, but her language about ambiguous loss is understood around the world. On the personal front, she loves theater, takes yoga classes, and recently hiked the Rockies. She has 2 children and 4 grandchildren. Journalist Kathy Ritchie is an editor for Next Avenue, a digital publication focusing on the 50-plus demo. Part of the PBS system, Next Avenue, allows her to continue reporting in the vein of NPR, where she worked as a broadcast reporter for many years. At home, she's occupied by a very opinionated 7-year-old. Both presenters know the rigors of caregiving firsthand. Pauline cared for her late husband while Kathy cared for her late mother. Both will share their personal experiences. After their conversation, we'll have a 10-minute break during which you can type questions and comments in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Also, feel free to type your questions as you think about them during their conversation after the break. Pauline and Kathy will respond to your queries.
Good morning. Is it time to start?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Boss.
Oh, and Kathy, you and I have a running thing. Feel free to call me Pauline, but if you're more relaxed calling me Dr. Boss, it's just fine. I think of you as a colleague, Kathy, very much so.
Thank you.
And congratulations on your new appointment to Next Avenue. That's terrific.
It is. It's a tremendous honor. So thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here. And Dana, thank you so much for the introduction. So,
yes.
All right.
Where shall we start?
Well, do you want to introduce some of the concepts that we might be going over in terms of, I think we kind of chatted about a little bit about, obviously just providing definitions, maybe grief, ambiguous loss, complicated grief. What do you think?
Okay. And our overall theme, of course, is guilt, grief, and guideposts. So that will guide us for the overall picture. For those of you who haven't heard this before, ambiguous loss is defined simply as an unclear loss. It does not refer to death. It refers, of course, to dementia, but it also refers to people who have taken care of loved ones who are not as they expected them to be. For example, a disabled child or someone who is physically unable to walk, as was the case with my husband. And so there are many different kinds of ambiguous loss. Two types are physical and psychological. A physical ambiguous loss is where someone you love and care about is physically removed from you. I would think that placing a loved one would be a physical ambiguous loss. But my first research was, of course, with soldiers missing in action in Vietnam. And today, during the pandemic, we think of physical ambiguous loss as not being able to be with our friends or with our loved ones who are in the hospital or in a nursing home, and not being able to travel if we are immigrants to see our loved ones far away. There are also psychological ambiguous losses, and that is where the person is present with you, but their mind or memory is gone. They're psychologically gone. People say they're here, but not here. And clearly that applies to caregiving for dementia. But it also may be other serious mental illness, or it could be addiction, or it could just be homesickness, serious depression and homesickness for a family in another country if you have emigrated to this country. The outcome of ambiguous loss, of course, is a frozen grief, or a disenfranchised grief, as Kandoka calls it. It isn't a normal grief. But let me explain that I think it is normal given the abnormal situation. So caregivers tend to be grieving along the way and often don't know it, which is what is so puzzling to them. They're not depressed, but they're grieving. They're sad about their loved one who is fading away. I think I'll leave it at that. And obviously, when you have an ambiguous loss, let me say this first, when you have an ambiguous loss that can't be fixed, such as Alzheimer's disease or the dementias or cancer or some other kind of disease, then the goal is resilience, okay? Does that help set the stage?
I think so. Should I start with my experience with all of this? And then
I love that. Yes, okay. We're supposed to tell our personal experience. Yeah. So let's do that.
Well, so my mother had frontotemporal degeneration, which is a lesser known type of dementia. We didn't really know what was going on in those early years. And, this was maybe in 2005 or 2006. So there just wasn't a lot of conversation about caregivers. The only kind of dementia I had heard of was Alzheimer's disease. And that's sort of what I thought my mom had. And, along the way, she was unfortunately misdiagnosed. And, it wasn't until I think 2010 when a doctor finally said, I think this is FTD, but she sort of she's very far along, and I don't want to put her in a machine. My mother had a lot of behaviors. She lost her primary language was Spanish, but she spoke English fluently, and she had forgotten all of her English. And then her language became her vocabulary became very repetitive. And the behaviors were tough. It was difficult to get support. And ultimately, I just didn't have the tools to properly support her. I feel like at the end of the day, as I look back, like knowing what I know now, and I think as we start talking about grief and guilt and shame, even that's where I struggle. So my mother's been gone for about 7.5 years now. And she passed in 2014, in August of 2014. And that same year I had a daughter, and it was very, it was such a strange time for me, because on one hand, I was supposed to be mourning my mom, but at the same time, I was supposed to be really excited about having a baby. And I think I was so confused about my emotions. I really just didn't know. I don't know how I functioned, actually, to be perfectly honest, because there were the two extremes of incredible joy and delight at my beautiful, chubby little baby, and then watching my mother just, she was literally shriveling up. Her body had atrophied. She always looked so tight and tense, and it was so hard to watch all of it. And when she passed, I think I felt relief, which you talk about in the book.
Very honest. It's very honest for you to say that, because I understand that totally.
Yeah. But then there's shame with feeling relief that your own mom has died. And it really, and I'm still processing it. And I think that's sort of what I loved. I started reading, I was very fortunate to have a sneak peek of your new book. And I'm so glad that you're writing about this idea of closure, and that it is a myth, because you really don't, you don't tie it up with a bow. It doesn't, just and put it in a box and say, okay, now I'm moving on with my life and I'm going to always be happy. I feel her void, probably more so now because my daughter doesn't have her biological grandmother in her life. Like, she sees photos of her, but, and even in my own way, over that period of time, she was sick for about a decade. I started forgetting who my mom was. It really, her disease sort of eclipsed my memories of her. And that's been really hard, because sometimes I try and I have just glimpses, and that's the heartbreak for me. So I've tried to, my husband recently, this was very sweet of him. My mother, I kept the rocking chair that she used to rock me in. And so he found a spot for it in our living room. So I find those little touches to be really important. And, she's in her home. So that those, and I know in the book, you talk about keeping the memory there and keeping your loved one present of mind through memories and photos and objects. So that's sort of what I've been doing. I feel like
recipes, Kathy, recipes. Can you make anything for your daughter, with your daughter, when she's old enough? Let's see, she's 7 now.
She's 7 now, and I confess I'm not the cook in our family.
So you could make grandma's cookies or grandma's bread or something like that. But I love the rocking chair story. That's absolutely correct. And be sure you tell your daughter that's grandma's rocking chair. I'm sure you have.
Yes, we have. And my daughter has lost both her grandmothers, so she's never met them. So it's really trying to keep these, their names, Grandma Gloria, who is my husband's mom, and Grandma Margarita. Margarita was my mom, and really keep them kind of present mind with her, so she knows them and so she sees them. And I think it's really important.
And that's the lack of closure, because you're presenting continuity across the generations, and whether the elders are living or not, I think it behooves us to have some continuity and tell the younger people about the elders. I like that you also mentioned your ambivalence, which of course I felt too, in my case, taking care of my husband, who was in his 80s, grew consistently unable to walk at all. plus he had many vascular issues, so he had wounds. So I became a nurse for wound care and for taking the INR blood tests and so on, far beyond where I ever wanted to go. And I must say I was angry at first about having to do that, and then did it. And in fact, there were moments when I was proud that I had learned how to do it. But on the other hand, and by the way, he died of a stroke, not of COVID. But we couldn't have the funeral, of course. He was very well known, and there would have been hundreds of people at his funeral. There was a Zoom, which is, of course, second best. And then we had a family Zoom where we talked about him as grandfather. And then a year later, which was just recently, we interred his ashes. And 5 of us were present to read some poetry and have a small ceremony, again, because of COVID. So it was just family.
I'm curious. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you your thoughts, because I'm sure a lot of people, perhaps on this call, we know a lot of people have been doing the sort of the Zoom funerals. Maybe that's shifting in different parts of the country now. I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, because it's traditionally we would have these in-person events where we could hug, we'd share food, we would, share drinks, we would share memories. And then to have the Zoom, do you think that for some exacerbated the grief and perhaps made it more complicated to not have what we are accustomed to?
I think the Zooms did the best they could. And frankly, some of them were very, very touching. But when it was for my own husband, I felt very alone. And again, you're alone because of COVID. There was someone with me from the family, but not what you usually expect. The community was not there. So isolation is, in fact, a very high risk factor for caregivers. And you feel a certain amount of guilt for not having done it in the lavish way that he expected. Can I say a little bit about the difference, though, between guilt and shame?
Yes, please.
It all comes under the rubric of ambivalence, which you described regarding your mother, having your mother die when your newborn was born. An incredible example of this, which must have been very, very anxious, made you anxious to have both things happening at once, an exit and an entry, incredibly difficult and stressful. So guilt, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say they were, my daughter was about 6 or 7 months old, but there were 2 ships passing.
Of course.
I just wanted the journalist in me, it's like,
oh, you want to be precise. I understand. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
So guilt is, in fact, not always bad. Guilt is an emotion that you feel for not having done something. So it has to do with your behavior. And therefore, guilt can motivate you to change and do something better. For example, when I didn't want to do the INR tests or didn't want to do the wound care, then I felt guilty. And so I thought, no, I'm going to learn to do this, and did. And shame is the one we worry about. Shame is personal. It's about your own self-esteem. And that one is dangerous for depression, suicidal ideation, and so on. It means I'm no good because I couldn't do this. Don't go there, because shame is difficult to ameliorate. Okay, so make sure you know, is it the behavior you didn't do or the question you didn't ask that makes you feel guilty? No, that's normal. It's an existential guilt. It exists, doesn't make sense. You have to live with it and normalize it, as I've said. Shame, on the other hand, is something you'll really need to talk with someone about. And as far as I know you, Kathy, it wasn't shame. It was probably guilt, right?
Oh, I think it's a tremendous amount of guilt that, to this day, I carry it with me. And it's exactly as you said, it's, you don't know what you don't know. And you're listening to these people who are experts, doctors. I think this is something that a lot of caregivers, this was part of our conversation last February when we chatted. I think a lot of people feel uncomfortable pushing back. And because, in our society, maybe we just don't always question a doctor, and I think it's very difficult sometimes to push back and keep pushing and sort of be that caregiver. And I think, although, while I did that sometimes, I wish I had done it much more. It was also, I didn't have the language. And that's what I actually found your book after my mom passed away, about 3 years after she died, for when we talked the first time, when I was doing the aging series, when I was a radio reporter in Phoenix. And I read your book, and I have it with me, and it's underlined and dog ear, and because it has language that I didn't have. Like, I didn't know it was okay to be angry and still love my mom. I didn't know it was okay to hate what was happening and still love my mom. I didn't know that it was okay to want her to die and still want her to be present with me. And we are not allowed to feel those complex emotions. I don't think there's a lot of our society very, and I think we're very black and white. Like, we are, we're supposed to feel one way, love, not hate. And I think even when we look at the caregiving experience, I would get very frustrated when I read things saying, oh, I'm honored to do this. I wasn't honored to do it. I did it because she was my mom. I didn't, it was, and my father was supportive as in that, he helped he gave up his career toward the end of his, he was nearing, retirement, and he stopped working to care for my mom, to keep her at home as long as he could. Obviously with FTD, it's very difficult with the behaviors. Right. And, for our family, it really was just devastating. It really was devastating. And it's hard. It's hard to not feel like we didn't do enough.
Exactly. You mentioned pushing back, which I want to pick up here. Shortly after my husband died, and I had been caregiving for many years without knowing it at first. I needed to have an annual exam or something. It's a routine visit to a doctor. So the first thing the doctor said to me, do you feel safe at home? Some of you have had the same questions asked you. Do you feel safe at home? I said, yes. Are you sleeping? I said, yes. Are you eating? Yes. Are you depressed? And I was stunned because I said, I'm grieving. And then she said, no, are you depressed? And I said, I'm grieving. And the doctor said, we have no place for that. I think we all should push back on that one. Every one of you. The doctors are, by the way, I'm in their corner. My daughter's a doctor. I'm 100% supportive of them. That list was given to them by someone else to ask. But we need to educate the medical community that grieving is a separate category, and that being sad during grieving is a normal reaction to a great loss. An abnormal thing happened to you. You lost a loved one. For caregivers, by the way, I would still say I was grieving, even if my husband had been alive, because I could see he was going. He was no longer the person I knew. And of course, if I hadn't been sad, there would have been something wrong with me, but it didn't register. And then, of course, the doctor said to me, do you want some medication? And I said, no, I'm grieving. I'm functioning. I'm also writing again, I said, which makes me think I wasn't depressed. I was functioning, taking care of myself, doing my work, etc. And the doctor said, let me know if you change your mind and want some medication. We shouldn't medicate normal grief. And the majority of people who are grieving, whether for someone who is ambiguously lost or someone who has died, we should know that we can do that. The majority of us can do that without medical help. But we do need human connections such as that the Duet offers with your groups.
And I certainly, I'm incredibly supportive of anyone who feels that they need some type of support when it comes to medication, because I think there are circumstances, but I agree with you. I think there's this real desire. I think there's a real discomfort in our society to know that somebody is going through a long grieving process. Like, I know that I was grieving the loss of my mother while she was still alive for years. Yeah. I still grieve, I still grieve for her. It's hard. I mean, I there are times where it's really, it's not that it's hard, it's just, it's sad. I think especially when I see other people who have, their children are going with their grandparents or their grandmother, or they're spending time with grandma. And, and I think this is really important too. Two things I want to touch on. One is finding meaning, which I want to kind of touch on how I found meaning, but also the psychological family, which is incredibly important. So, with my daughter, for example, I have a friend from high school. I'm at Duet right now, and I actually went to high school around here. My family lived around here. So it's always kind of, I feel it's emotional for me when I come here, because my mom and dad's house is just a few blocks away. But my friend's mother has served as, she's a psychological family member. She's like a surrogate grandmother for my daughter. My daughter calls her Mimi. Oh, and she knows. I remember once when she was a few years ago, she was little, and she asked Mimi Linda if she would be her grandma. Oh. And it was, very emotional, but now she understands that Mimi Linda is not her biological grandma, but that is her. When she goes up there, she has that sort of emotional, they have a strong bond. Mimi Linda has been with her since she was 2 months old, when I went back to work. And, even going through this process, along the way, I've really found a psychological family in this space. When I started attending an FTD support group, those people were my psychological family. I would see them once a month for 2 hours because I had a wonderful boss who let me leave the office, which is also very important. So I could go process. I got my work done, and that's all he asked of me. He understood that I needed that. And it's hugely important for employers to understand that they're going to see more and more of their employees becoming caregivers, and they need to help support that in whatever way they can.
I agree with that. Yeah.
But I found a psychological family in this support group. I found a psychological family with some friends who were going through a similar journey. A good friend of mine, her grandmother had Alzheimer's, and we found meaning together. Her grandmother, I think, passed about a year or so before my mom. We created a community group to raise awareness and talk about dementia. And Anne was helpful, Anne Wheat with Duet, Dana Kennedy, and the people who are actually on this call, some of the people here on this call, including you, are part of my psychological tribe, because you get it, and you need to find people who get it. And that was in part how I found meaning. We were talking about dementia and moving the needle, really. So these passings weren't in vain.
I like that you use the word tribe as well. Psychological family is the family in your heart and mind. It may or may not be your biological family, but many of us today have moved away from our biological relatives. So you need to find somebody who is like a sister to you, like a brother to you, and a grandmother for your child, and so on. Some people call it fictive kin. Other people call it your chosen family, your tribe, your community. It doesn't matter the term so much. I've used psychological family. because it is in your heart and mind. But mostly, Kathy, I like what you said because it helped you find meaning and make sense of dementia, which often doesn't make sense. It's a nonsensical situation. So thank you for that story. There's a human need to make sense out of what we experience. The brain does not like randomness. It wants a pattern. And so you need to find people with whom you can talk, because you can't really talk normally with the person who has dementia. Right. So you need to find people that you can converse with who are walking in the same shoes as you are. It's very important that it be similar.
I agree. And I was really lucky. And again, I didn't have your book at the time. And I feel, looking back at that, I feel really lucky that I formed connections with people who were on that path. I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking of a woman named Debbie, and her husband had FTD. And I actually met her husband first. He lived at the same assisted living facility as my mother. And she and I kind of overlapped. And then we've realized that our loved ones were in the same assisted living, and we met at an FTD support group. And, she's one of my favorite people because she probably doesn't even know this, but in some ways she had that mom energy for me, which I just really loved about her. And, our husband has since passed, and I did a podcast about life after dementia called the Recovering Caregiver. And it was she was one of my first guests because we were talking about the experience of the dying experience, which, is something else that I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, especially with your new book coming out. We're so weird about death and dying, and we just don't talk about it. And I'm concerned about that in the light of COVID, even in the number of people that have passed away from COVID-19. We just don't really talk about the 700,000 Americans who died, or 700,000 people who've died from COVID-19.
Can I give you my thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear it because we're so weird about death and dying.
I think a long time ago, decades ago, there was a book written, The Denial of Death, and it was very, very popular in America, but it's very hard to read. It's very Freudian. However, I think the title was correct. We live in a culture that denies death, and I'm talking about mainstream culture because there are subcultures in America, which are becoming dominant, that don't think this way. So I'm really talking about Euro-American descendants. Maybe because we've had so much pain in our society originally, suffering from the Civil War, from even before that time, the eradication of the American Indians, slavery, for example, was great ambiguous loss when families were separated on the auction block. And then we're a country of immigrants, which we keep forgetting about. And every immigrant has had an ambiguous loss of their homeland, of their language, perhaps, of the rest of their family they left behind. We are a nation of ambiguous losses, unresolved and unacknowledged. And once we face that, we will have less trouble with suffering, watching people suffer, helping the suffering. We will have less trouble with death. We will not deny death. I want to tell you my experience with witnessing my husband's death, for which I was very fortunate during COVID. I was allowed to visit every other day for 1 hour as an essential caregiver for him. And so I would go and have dinner with him each evening. At least I'd be with him while he had dinner. And this time I came and I noticed when his tray was served, he couldn't raise his right arm to pick up the spoon. So I feel guilty about not being savvy about that. I noticed it, but then I just fed him. It was his favorite menu, and I fed the food to him. And then the nurse said, it's okay for you to go. He's better now, even though he still couldn't raise his right hand. And I remember when I went to the door, he blew a kiss, I blew one back. And then at 10 o'clock that night, the hospital administrator called and said, your husband is unresponsive. What should we do? And of course, he had a do not resuscitate order. But I called my daughter, who's a physician, and she came with me. And we spent the night with him. He had some seizures, which were hard to watch, but my daughter was able to tell me how to deal with them and what it meant that she said he was not in pain. So how fortunate I was to have her there. And then in the morning, she said, I'm going home to take a shower. I'll be right back. And she was within the hour. He had a seizure when I was alone with him, and I felt she had prepared me for that. And then when she came back, she said, it's your turn now, Mom, you go. And I looked at her. This will be hard for me to say. And I said, everyone I've ever loved died when I left the room. I'm not going. And he took his last breath. So I learned not to be afraid of it.
Well, you've seen, I read in your book about your brother. And so this is this, you've seen it and you've experienced so much loss. And it's remarkable. I mean, I'm so honored that you've taken what you've seen and what you've learned and you're putting it into words in your books and sharing these lessons, because we just don't, there's such a discomfort with this space and such a lack of, I didn't know what it looked like until I sat with my mom and she took her last breath, and it wasn't what, so we were together from the very moment I was born to the moment she was gone. And
that's a privilege, Kathy.
And I didn't know it was a privilege but it also didn't go the way I wanted it to. And that's why I feel like it's so important that we talk about the death and dying process, because if you're lucky, it might happen in your sleep. and very quickly. And it wasn't quick for my mother. And I didn't realize there was a part of me that was in denial that it was happening. And then I didn't know what it looked like. And I think everyone should have a conversation about that, because it was jarring to see someone exit this world.
Yes. I think more of us need to not be afraid and not leave the room when we should be sitting there, witnessing the transformation. It's not easy, but you said something, it didn't go the way I wanted it to. Well, that's the problem for all of us, isn't it? We want to be in control of our own lives. And
mastery, Dr. Boss, mastery.
Yes. And that's one of the guideposts is tempering our mastery. That most of us feel like we want to be in charge of our lives, of our destinies. By the way, the exceptions would be the Native Americans, who have a more harmony with nature. They don't believe they need to conquer it. They need to be in harmony with it. We need to learn from them that we can't always straighten the river and prevent a thunderstorm and have a death the way we want it. We can't do that. And so we want to be in charge. For example, it's wonderful that we have a vaccine for the coronavirus. Now, we have wonderful scientists and medical people. My God, we should be on our knees to the doctors and nurses and medical support people. And so, yes, we want mastery, but we also need to take a more Eastern view, a more harmony with nature view, that we can't master everything, and death may be one of them. And illness may be another one.
And I think that's something that we've really witnessed in the last year and a half, this really no control over what's happened. I'm wondering, are there other guideposts that you would turn to during the pandemic that might be helpful for people who are perhaps still dealing with, limited visitation of in long-term care facilities? What guideposts would you refer them to? Because obviously mastery is one that is a situation where you have very little control. It's improved for some. Are there others?
Well, I think identity turns out to be important for the researchers who are studying this across cultures, of course, that we have to change how we see ourselves. And so it's a change in identity. We have to revise our identity when we're living with an ambiguous loss, because you can't control it. And you need to move back to a more existential position. It is what it is. And you can't change it, and you don't have to feel guilty because it's not your fault. And I've written elsewhere, you want to blame the context. In your case, you want to blame the dementia, not the person who has it, not yourself, not the doctor, but the dementia. And in case of COVID, my God, we've had this powerful virus encapsulating us for almost 2 years now. And we're mastery-oriented people, as I said, and it's driving us nuts. The uncertainty, the ambiguity. But I think we may also have learned that we're stronger than we think, we're more resilient than we think, and we may have found smaller things we can control while this gigantic thing is uncontrollable. By the way, getting a vaccine is one way to have control again now, but you can see other people have misinterpreted that and saying, I'm going to take control by not having it, which is nonsensical. I think that's why a lot of people during the pandemic baked bread or cooked a lot, because in 2 hours you can control a product, you can create and control it and enjoy eating it, which I highly recommend doing when you're in a situation out of control. Caregivers need something they can control in their life, whether it's doing crossword puzzles, whether it's calling a friend, whether it's exercising. You'll know what it is, but you need something you can control, because the work you're doing is sort of out of control. It changes day to day. You can't make it better. It's probably just getting worse in some cases. With a newborn, by the way, you're caregiving, but it's getting better.
Well, he's 7, so
it'll get better. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'm done.
Talking about the mastery during COVID, it reminds me of a story. I interviewed this woman for a story about complicated grief. And this was during the time that no one could really enter long-term care facilities, assisted living facilities. And the woman, her name is Mary Daniel, and she started a Facebook group called Caregivers for Compromise. And what she did was, for 114 days, she could not visit her husband, who had Alzheimer's disease. She got a job as a dishwasher at the facility, and she was able to visit her husband. And it was like, talk about grit, talk about taking control of a completely uncontrollable situation for so many. And she's really finding meaning now by creating these, organizing caregivers across the country with via social media, and teaching them how to be advocates, teaching them how to reach out to their local lawmakers, because everything really happens at the local level, at your state legislature, and teaching them how to be really just teaching them how to be advocates.
Right.
Because,
Right.
So what happened in the long-term care facilities was devastating. It was devastating. I remember once my mother, this was during, I think it was a bad flu year. It was 2012, and it was a bad flu year. And I was losing my mind. They wouldn't let me in. And finally, like every day I'm pushing. And they, this was, they put a mask on me. This was before everything happened, and I was able to see my mother, but I mean, I had to fight. And that was, over the flu. I can't imagine what these caregivers have been going through during this pandemic. I mean, my gosh, I think every finding mastery, I don't know how you find, I guess that's the question. How do you find meaning and hope coming out of this? And what many of these caregivers who had loved ones in facilities, how they find meaning and hope
Well, the meaning is that we're stronger than we think. We survived. We're still standing. Most of us, some people, of course, have not thrived. And I encourage them to seek help from the medical source or a professional therapist. They may need medication or so on. That probably is the minority. The majority of us, as I said earlier, are just sort of going nuts. We're anxious. We feel unmoored. We feel a certain anxiety. Anxiety is fraught right now. But I think it's normal in this situation. And again, we come back to resilience. The fact that we're still doing this, the fact that all of these wonderful people have joined us today to listen in, means that we're still functioning, we're still up and around, we're still caring about our work and caring about other people. I was curious, Kathy, how you see yourself as having grown from not only the experience of your ambiguous loss with your mother and then your clear loss through death, but also how you are now these years later, having had this gigantic, nasty virus control your life. How have you coped?
Probably like a lot of people, not always so well. I have the privilege, had and still have the privilege of working from home. I realized that was a very unique, fortunate situation for me. My daughter, my husband and I were able to, as best as we could, support her online learning. And, it's been hard. It's been very hard. I've had to let a lot of things go. I'm a control freak. I very much like to know what's going to be happening. And so to not know what's going to happen in the next month or two is stressful.
Have you gained some more insight into your own strength about that? The fact that you haven't caved in. Because the
fact that I'm still here is a miracle. No, it's hard. I was looking at some of I was trying to reread your book in the context of COVID, just some of the tools, really finding what can I control? I can only control I can really only control my reaction. Now that I have a 7-year-old, when she sees that I'm freaked out about something, I have to be very mindful of that. I'm not always good at that, but I need to be mindful of that because she feels and responds to how I respond.
Of course.
So, I think the one thing I can control to an extent is, as you said, there are going to be vaccines available soon for her age group. Mm-hmm. That gives me some comfort and some control. So it's
Can you give yourself credit? Because that's one of the things caregivers are not good at doing. Can you give yourself credit for having remained strong? My gosh, you got a promotion in the midst of all this. And you have this daughter and you look well. Can you give yourself credit for having not only survived all that has happened to you in the past?
I give myself credit because I've also during this time sought help. I now speak with, I think this period, I don't typically deal with anxiety. I think it's been very anxiety producing, or maybe I have and just didn't realize it. And I've been talking to someone I really think it's, again, that's coming from a position of privilege that I can, since a lot of people don't take insurance anymore, I've been able to do that. And I think it's really important. And sometimes I don't like to talk about my feelings or what's going through my head. I'm kind of a stewer. But I've really tried to work more on that and kind of take care of myself a little bit more. How about you?
Thank you for asking. Well, yoga has been very helpful, and it's one of the things that could continue on Zoom. Though when I get busy, I confess that I then don't do it. Also, my doctor daughter has gotten me to walk more, and I'm no athlete, so I still don't enjoy it. I'm sad to say. I feel guilty about that. But I do it. And so at 87, I can do a mile, but that's where I stop. So exercise and music, of course, and writing. I have to confess that writing is something I can control. I can shape that sentence the way I want to, whether the virus is out there or not. And it has been a godsend to be able to do that. So those are my coping mechanisms, yes.
I would say exercise has been one of mine. It's been, I used to go someplace to do that. And now I've actually found a lot of joy in just working. I live in Phoenix, so I can do it year round in my garage. And that's something that it's a joy for me to be able to be healthy, to do that and to go into my garage and listen to some music and have 30 minutes to myself. And obviously trying to relish those moments with my daughter. As I said, she's kind of at an age where she's, very opinionated, but also time moves quickly. And these moments, this will pass. And that's really, I know we need to kind of wrap things up soon. This will pass. Yes. And, my daughter being sassy and opinionated, that will pass. I will get to a point where she won't want to, we don't have she'll be a teenager. So I think these moments are short, and whenever possible, I really try and remember that it will pass, that life is filled with ups and downs, and that's just a fact of life.
I hope she keeps a little bit of the sass.
I do too.
Young women need it today. I want all the caregivers out there and the people who've lost loved ones to know nobody else is going to take care of you. You need to take care of yourself. And that's really, really hard for those of us who have a tendency toward caring to not be guilty about, to think, I should be taking care of this other person, not me. But the fact of the matter is, you need to stay alive. You are valuable. Take care of yourself.
And that is so hard. I think it's so hard. I struggle with it. But you're right. I think we absolutely 30 minutes, an hour, that joy, finding that joy, is so important. I see Dana's on.
Yes.
I am back.
Kathy.
I am back. Hello, ladies. The other thing I just want to add is breathing is so important. Breathing. Sometimes we don't actually realize that we can completely change our anxiety level by just taking
deep breaths. Yes.
A deep breath and letting it out. And I just have a stone at my computer that, I always remind myself to breathe. And so hopefully our caregivers, because it's one thing if you can't find time to exercise or do yoga or go for a walk, you can find time to take a breath.
Good point.
And breathing is really important. And we've actually, at AARP, we've actually done an entire session on breathing and how important it is. So thank you, Pauline and Kathy, for sharing your deeply personal and professional perspectives with us. We are going to take a brief break until 10:15, so you can stretch, maybe breathe, and the Duet staff will compile your questions you submitted in the chat. There's a lot of questions in there and a lot of comments as well. We'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can in the allotted time. So also please see the link in the chat box to take a short survey. Your feedback is critical for our funders, and we genuinely value your thoughts and take them to heart. Your comments from the last event generated this event, and I just want to thank you both again for sharing your stories. I shed a couple of tears with you. Loss is difficult, but it also is important that we share our journey with others. So we'll go ahead and take that break, and we'll come back at 10:15. So thank you, everybody, and thank you, Kathy and Pauline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I think we are ready to come back together, and we have a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. The first question is, I feel like a pinball going from expert to expert and getting conflicting opinions. No one knows my spouse better than I. How do I erase all the noise and learn to trust my gut? Am I ready to defy the medical pros, do what I sense is best, and let the chips fall where they may?
Let me jump in here first. I think caregivers need their own doctors. You can't argue with your loved one's doctor. That is their doctor, and they are beholden to the patient. You need your own doctor, and that's where I would voice the opinions that you're having now. So that's sort of the rules of the game. And every caregiver needs their own primary doctor. They'll be in your corner.
The only thing I would add is, as a former caregiver, I get it. I oftentimes felt like I was forced to choose between terrible and less terrible. The only counsel I could give, and I'm not a doctor, I just write and report for a living, is sometimes you have to trust your gut, and sometimes you might not. It might be wrong, but you have to try, and you have to listen to your gut and listen to your heart. And because oftentimes the options that you're presented with are truly terrible and slightly less terrible. That was my experience. And it was very hard not to feel like I was making the worst choices for my mom all the time. I mean, I would make myself sick over stress, literally broke out in hives on my back once, because the stress would just consume me. I think you might make a wrong choice, you might not. And I think what Dr. Boss is saying is right too. I think having your own physician, and perhaps another person that you can go to talk to, a sounding board, because sometimes we kind of get stuck in our own caregiver vacuum. And I think it's good to find someone that you can trust, who knows you maybe, and can perhaps be a sounding board.
And here in Minnesota, maybe they had more opportunities, but I had coaches. I had pharmaceutical coaches for the regular pain medications. I had the cannabis pharmaceutical coach for cannabis when it was found he could no longer take the other medication anymore. I don't know what I would have done without having people like that at the end of my phone that I could call and say, what should I be doing here and there? That all came through our family practice clinic here in Minnesota.
That's so great that you had access to that. That's really neat.
It was very helpful.
Okay, I'm going to keep us moving right along with all the questions we got. And we may not get to all the questions, but we will do our best. While my mom required 24/7 care, my husband became angry. I was not paying enough attention to him. I struggled to serve both, feeling guilty about my divided obligations. After she died, I discovered his affair. Now I'm grieving the loss of my mother and my marriage. In your work, is such collateral damage common?
My hunch is that didn't start with the caregiving. He was not very considerate of you. So there was a red flag there already. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you had to experience both losses. But if you can, that's not your fault. It's not the fault of the caregiving. it's the fault of his inability to be a humane and a caring person. That's not your fault. And so I would hope that you would pick up and move forward and make new friends. And remember, that was not your fault. He was not a caring person for you as a caregiver, for the person you were caring for. He just didn't have it. So perhaps this is the world telling you something. And please think about moving forward in a new way with new friends.
Yeah, I would agree. Certainly not your fault. I mean, I know it can be difficult for partners. It is a journey, but my gosh, you know, I'm so sorry. That's heartbreaking. And I understand the grief on both counts. And I'm really sorry, but I concur with Dr. Boss. It's not your fault. And I certainly hope you can move on. And it's hard. Ugh, it's just so hard. That's terrible.
Okay, the next question, is it normal not to experience guilt?
Well, it's normal to experience it and not experience it. I mean, let's not be hard on ourselves. Let's not put a harness on ourselves as to what we must feel and what we must not feel. So I would say, go with the flow. Let's all be more existential. Let's go with the flow. Let's listen to our Native American colleagues and more Eastern belief system, which is there's no binary thinking. I'm good or I'm bad. I'm guilty or I'm not guilty. It's more that we live in the gray area, especially when we're caregiving. And that'll teach us a new way of thinking, both and thinking. You know, I'm both feeling guilty and not guilty.
You know, I was taking some notes before, well, I've been preparing for this conversation and going through everything. And one of the notes I wrote down is loss is complicated, many shades of gray. I stole that from Dr. Boss. I mean, I agree. Let go of the binary because it doesn't work in this space. It doesn't. I think you really need to accept it's all ambiguous. It's all ambiguous. There is no clarity, and it's frustrating. But I think once you start to accept that, it becomes slightly easier, slightly.
Yep, and some good things have come out of this lack of binary. Jazz improvisation, improvisational theater. Many good stories have been written that are purposely ambiguous because we happen to like that. It keeps us on the edge of our seat. So know that you can live within this shadowland. You can live in this gray space, and if you use both and thinking.
I would add that it probably makes you would make one more resilient at the end of the day.
Yes, at the end of the day, it does actually. You're better prepared for life.
So the next question is, I'm suffering so much guilt that I was so frustrated with my mom the day before I found her dead. I wasn't as kind in some of the things I said and did. She called out not long after I put her to bed, but she did that frequently. The one time of 7 years I didn't go and check, I found her dead in the next morning. The shame is killing me.
Okay, well, here you need to reflect as to whether that's guilt or shame. It sounds, I don't know you, but it sounds to me like it's guilt about not having done something that you routinely did, or that you wish you hadn't done something, being frustrated with her, or so on. So maybe you could take that and do something in her honor, or do something with someone else who needs help and do it better than you did it the first time. In other words, make amends. However, if it's shame, and only you will know this, are you saying to yourself, I'm no good, I'm a terrible person? If that's the case, you should talk with someone about that, because that's a more serious interpretation. It's a more serious meaning that you have given to this loss. and only you will know which it is. It may, in fact, be both. So tend to the guilt part. Do something differently with someone else next time, or do something in honor of your mother. And if it's shame, I would talk to somebody about that.
The only thing I would add is that I don't think you're alone. My mother had a few false alarms. And when it was finally time, when she was starting the dying process, I actually was in denial and I didn't really believe it. And I think, I had this moment, I was washing baby bottles and we had one of our incredible monsoon storms come through. And I just had this feeling of, I had to go check it. I had to go. And the next day my mother died and I did see her that night, but in the days leading up to it, I just couldn't wrap my head around that it was happening. And I had started a new job and had this baby that I had to keep alive. And, I get it. I think so many of us get it. We just don't always feel like we do it right. And I hope with time you can find some peace or talking through it, because you're not alone. I mean, I think it's so much guilt, and it can be so hard when it doesn't go the way we want it to go. I'm so
There's
sorry.
one more thing to say about guilt, which is was uncomfortable for me to hear. It may be for you too. And that is, it's tied up in our ego. It's tied up in our ego that we're supposed to be a perfect person or a perfect caregiver. And that's an ego thing. It's an ego trip. And we need to let go of it and say, we're human beings. We're less than perfect. We make mistakes. And I don't need to feel guilty, or certainly not shame about this.
The next question, could you characterize community group? It sounds much like the psychological family concept.
So my friend, Suzette and I, we decided to kind of create a neighborhood community group where we would have really monthly happy hours. And we would, try and encourage other caregivers to come out when they could, and really just talk about ways we could move the needle. We actually went out and formed partnerships with different local organizations and tried to have events where we would raise awareness about frontotemporal degeneration. For my friend Suzette, whose grandmother passed away from Alzheimer's disease, she was very active in trying to turn our state capitol purple in honor of Alzheimer's Awareness Month. So we really just kind of, tried to just come and connect with other people, including Dana and Anne, to share what we were trying to do and create a community. It was a small community, but I think, and Dana, maybe you have some additional thoughts on it. I mean, it was really kind of grassroots and just a way to create an informal community of people who are in some ways survivors of something pretty horrible. I mean, dementia is probably top of something I can think of a lot, but it's one of the worst things that can happen. And I think when you find community, you find your tribe, and you can talk about it, and people get the loss and the grief that you're going through. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I mean,
thoughts on it.
The only thing that I would add is we also had the education component to it. So it was a social component and then also an education component. So we gave people an opportunity to get together, ask questions, and then we also did education. So it was good.
Love that. Congratulations.
Yeah. We had a lot of fun with it too.
Yeah.
So my husband has FTD and has been in a memory care community for 1.5 years. While placing him there has given me the needed support and is helping me manage, I am captured by the guilt and feeling that I am not strong enough to care for him alone at home. I suppose that feeling is normal, is it?
It's normal, but again, think about it's also ego thing saying I could do this when in fact we can't. So maybe for me, when hearing it was centered in my ego, that was a wake-up call to say, well, I can change that. I I do not believe I'm that great a person that I can do this without help. And maybe that'll help you to do the same. Know that you're a good person, you're a competent person, but this is way beyond our pay scale, so to speak, as they say. And you can comfort him and help him in other ways now. And you'll know what those are. But taking help from others is, do not feel guilty. It's a waste of your energy. Use your energy in another direction.
I think I would also throw in that, I can't remember the statistic, and maybe Dr. Boss or Dana, caregivers, the stress that you're under, you put your own health, you put your own life at risk in a way. You put your health can be compromised, your well-being. And I think I too I confronted a lot of, and even now sometimes look back and think, oh, maybe I should have stopped working and took care of my mom. My mom came from South America, and I think there was an expectation as the daughter that I would play that role, and I didn't. I didn't do that. I was working, but I was always there, like always there. I think it's really difficult, but I think you also have to know and remember that, you must take care of yourself, because if you can't and you're in the hospital or something happens, your husband, who's going to pick up? Who's going to do the work? And I think even when your loved one is in a assisted living facility, the work doesn't stop. At least it didn't for me. I was there constantly before work, sometimes after work, at lunch sometimes. I really tried to be a presence whenever I could.
Can I add something? We didn't talk about the statistics, but 40% of Alzheimer's caregivers die from stress-related causes. And this sample size was age 55 to 64. What about the caregivers who are in their 70s and 80s? They die at an even higher rate. And then that other study, which did study older people, 63% of people died at a higher rate than their same age group. If you don't start thinking about reaching for help and that this is a normal thing, you could in fact die from the overstress and the anxiety of what you're experiencing. And then your loved one would be without you totally.
Great points. Several of us are caregivers for husbands with dementia. We participate in support groups. One complained that it seemed to be a one-way street, with everyone airing their situation, but perhaps not getting much in the way of suggestions, solutions, or help. What is an appropriate expectation for support groups?
Oh, you need to have a balance and speak up if that's happening in your support group, because you don't want just a pity session, complaining session. At some point in time, the leader, and if the leader doesn't do it, speak up yourself. It should shift to, so what do we do about it? What are the tips for living with this stressor? So you're talking about coping with stress. So first of all, you've identified the problem, and that shouldn't take more than a half an hour, because otherwise it could go on for a month. And then you should switch to, what do we do about it? How do we live with this stress that won't go away? So speak up in your group. You have a legitimate issue.
I agree. I think this is one of those pushback opportunities. Really, yeah, I think 1,000%. You need solutions, and you need to find resources and answers. And I think if you're not being led toward a solution, I understand we all need to vent sometimes. I think that's part of it. But as I'm going to say it, as Pauline said, no more than 30 minutes. It's a very seductive path to go down, especially if there's family conflict and there's that. It's very easy to go down that path. But look for the solutions. Look for the solutions.
Yeah. If it moves to perseveration and obsession, it's a strong predictor of your depression. So if you say it over and over and over again, how bad things are, it's self-reinforcing and it makes it worse. So you can do that for a while, and then you have to shift to, so now what do I do about it? How can I cope? Good question. All good
Excellent.
questions.
I nursed my mother through dementia to her passing about 5 years ago, and my father through Alzheimer's to his passing 2 years ago. Now I'm helping my husband, who is 85 years old, as he begins his Alzheimer's journey. I am 16 years younger than my husband, which makes me very able to care for my husband, but I can feel my grief for his loss as well as my need to prepare for my care when my time comes. I'm reading about voluntary stopping eating and drinking. Is it unfair for me to expect my daughter, who is 47 years old, to help me through VSED if needed in the future?
So clarify this. This is the caregiver now who's
Yes.
asking this?
Yep.
And she's 14 years younger, but why doesn't she first plan on living a life as possibly a widow? Or does she have some illness? I'm not clear.
It doesn't appear to be. It sounds like what she would like to address is the voluntary stopping eating and drinking.
So I'm going to give her a both and answer. I understand the stopping and eating should be a choice. So she should say to herself, I have both the choice of stopping eating and drinking and of planning a new life for myself. I just focusing on the one would only make sense if you already have a terminal illness. And I can't tell if you do or not. So please make that a both and statement. You don't have to die after your husband does. You must have a life that you can look forward to, even if it's just a year or 6 months or 10 years. And so think about, I have both this choice to die by stopping eating and drinking and the choice of planning a new life for myself.
You know what I think she's asking is preparing her daughter for her husband who may voluntarily stop eating and drinking.
If that's the case, I support that. I support people with a terminal illness taking it into their own hands. I just had a cousin in Switzerland where this is legal, who had her exit medicine to be used with a doctor. And she felt good about having it. But in fact, in the end, she never used it. But she had 2 or 3 farewell parties because she was going to take the exit medicine the next Monday. And she had these farewell parties over the weekend. So I think she just liked parties. So I wholeheartely agree that human beings should have control over their own death. Yes.
I think a conversation, though, if she's talking about preparing, this is her husband's choice to proceed with VSED, which we actually, one of our writers did an incredible story on VSED, and it's on Next, if you type in VSED on Next Avenue's website, Kevin Berger was the writer, and I didn't know anything about it. It was really fascinating to learn about this, but I do think conversations, plural, are warranted if she's, I think everyone needs to be, it needs to be discussed with the family if this is what the husband is going to do, proceed with VSED. I certainly would have several conversations with my child if that were the route, to really prepare them, because again, it's complicated.
And I can just share my personal story is my grandmother had a hernia operation and she was very healthy in her late 80s. And during that hernia surgery, they poked a hole in her colon. And so the doctor kept acting like she was going to get better and they were going to take her to San Francisco and she was going to have an operation, but she had to get stronger. But long story short, 3 months of begging for ice chips. And she was being kept alive on TPN. And finally, I flew home and talked to my mom, and it was the holidays, and talked to my stepdad and talked to my little sister. And I said, I think that we need to let mom grandma know that it's okay to let go. And so we went to the hospital. We told them that we wanted to take her off the TPN, and she died within 24 hours. And also my mom had the conversation with my grandmother. We all did, and said, it's okay for you to let go, because the suffering that she was under and the suffering that we were under watching her beg for ice chips wasn't anything you want anybody to have to go through that you love. And so I agree, having that conversation with your daughter about that this may be in his future, I think would be a good conversation. If that's the question that you were asking, I think we addressed it. So I'll move on to the next question. Some thinking is the dying person will hold on, won't go if you are present. Better you should leave and let them go?
Well, that's not a black and white answer. That's not a binary answer. You have to question yourself. Am I afraid to be there when they die? Certainly, I had reviewed that question for myself. The other one was, I'm the person in the family who cries the easiest, so that family members may have been protecting me by dying when I left the room. There are different hypotheses. You can play with them for yourself, but there's no one right answer. I would just say for yourself, don't be afraid to witness a death. And you could even ask, you can sense their feeling if they want you to be there or not. I think the dying person will protect us, without us knowing it. So if you're strong, they probably would not wait until you're out of the room.
I also think you could potentially, if you're afraid of watching the process unfold, which can take a couple of days or longer, I think it's worthwhile having a conversation, perhaps with someone in a hospice organization, to ask them, what does this look like? What can I expect? And I think you'll find, I know we have some wonderful hospice organizations here, Hospice of the Valley, and they have individuals, volunteers who sit with people who are in the dying process if you need a break. So I don't know if that's a service available in other parts of the country, but I think that's something also, because it is very heavy and emotional if it's just you and it's over a period of days. So perhaps there's an opportunity to find these companions that are volunteer. I think, death doulas, I think I've heard of. I don't know I think that is a paid service, but I know that, for example, as I said, our hospice here, one of our larger hospice groups, has a voluntary service where they will kind of help that process. So, and also just educating yourself about what this might look like.
And I'll just add, I was a hospice social worker in my beginning of my career, and I watched patients do both. Sometimes they would wait until their loved one got there, and sometimes they would wait until their loved one left. And so I think that, it can go both ways.
Yeah.
So the next question, as I'm watching tears are flowing, I have been wondering why I do not cry normally in the face of reality I am facing and the tragedy for my husband. I actually think I am not loving enough.
Because you're not crying? I think so. I think you're there. You don't have to, tears don't signify the amount of love you have for a person. I think you're present. I'll tell you, not a lot of people stick around. I think a lot of caregivers who are on this journey for a period of years will tell you, families, friends, they don't stick around, not because they don't want to, but after a while, it's like, how's your mom doing? The same. So I think the fact that you're present is a tremendous declaration of love. You don't have to cry. I don't think I even cried right after my mom died. I don't remember. I think I didn't believe it, really. I think I made them chat. I don't know. I don't remember. But I think being present, it's your presence says it all.
Exactly. Perfect. Perfect answer, Kathy.
I agree. So dealing with various behavior changes, as a caregiver, I have this hope that keeps coming up that if I change my behavior or logic, then my mother will change her behavior.
Well, now let's talk about ego again, wanting its own way. You're saying that to yourself in the face of a disease that has a great amount of research behind it, saying it's real. It's real. There's a cognitive decline. And so you have to pay attention to the fact that you're not on equal ground anymore. And that the more you're really trying to, how can I say it, beat your head against a brick wall if you're trying to have a reasonable conversation with someone who has dementia. It just won't happen. Stop trying. And you are the mentally healthy person, so you should have the sense and the ego strength to stop trying. But on the other hand, find somebody you can have a reasonable conversation with. It has to be somebody else. You do need that.
I agree. I think you may be harming yourself more by trying to insert logic. I remember with my mom when she got to a point where she literally, I think her vocabulary was a handful of words. I mean, you have to be in their world. I was certainly not very good at that. I think for my mom, I'd always hoped like today would be different. But trying to accept her reality and how, the space she was in, I wasn't always good at it. It was frustrating, but I think it was the right thing to do.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes, you have to enter their fantasies, their world, and play with it. You can have some fun with it, actually, but balance it with also having somebody else who's logical with whom you can talk.
So dealing with various behavior changes as a caregiver, I have this hope that keeps coming up that thank you for explaining the difference between guilt and shame. My question is, how do you deal with those who question the amount of visits I make to my husband in assisted living without feeling guilt?
How often are they visiting him?
We have to know in ourselves, and we have to be strong in our own values and our own selves, and knowing what I'm doing is right. I know that the every other day visit to my husband could have been criticized, and the part of me criticized it as well. And on the other hand, I was grateful for that. So again, we are not perfect people. Embedded in all of this is thinking you're a perfect person. We aren't perfect people. We do the best we can. So go easier on yourself. Have more compassion for yourself. Be your own caregiver, because I know you're a good caregiver, but do that for yourself as much as you're doing it for the other person.
I agree. Be kind. And I think it's really easy, and I've experienced this myself. It's really easy to point fingers and judge and not do the work, and to be hypercritical of what you're doing. And what you're doing is, even if your loved one is in a facility, it's hard to go there and see them and to beat them. I know for me, it got to a point where it was really difficult because my mother wasn't really responsive and it was very one-sided. And that was hard. Like I would sit there sometimes and she would be in bed and I would try and talk to her. And it was really difficult, and there was a period where I didn't go see her. I was in my first trimester and I was sick all the time. And I was fortunate to have a friend who worked at the community that she was living in. And so she would go and sit with my mom and visit her and check in on her. And then my dad later moved into the independent living, which was really great. But you can't beat yourself up over it. I mean, you can only do what you can do, and you have to survive. Going every day may not be the healthiest thing. Sometimes you have to take a break. I had to take a physical break because I was sick. Be kind to yourself.
Yeah.
And she wanted to add that, because I guess it got cut up a little bit, that she wanted to do what was best for him. So
what was best for him, if he's already in care, is for her to take care of herself.
Good answer. My primary question and concern is finding a solution to how to control my frustration or change my angry reaction when my husband and mother, both with dementia, repeat the same question with no memory of the answer that I have given them multiple times in short time frames.
So you need to recognize the disease. You're ignoring the disease. They probably can't do what you want, if I understand the question right. And so again, you're beating your head against a brick wall. And frankly, I wouldn't do that. It'll only harm yourself. But you do need to find someone else, even if it's on the telephone or on Zoom, so you can have a normal conversation with them. You're probably hungry for that. I surely understand that. But you can't have a normal conversation with the people you're caring for. If you're lucky, now and then one might pop out, but it's not going to happen. You are fighting the disease, like certain people are fighting the virus now and saying, it's just normal. It's not happening. So don't deny the virus and don't deny the dementia. It's there, it's bigger than you are. And it's not the fault of the people you're taking care of. It's not their fault. It's the fault of the disease.
I think I would probably turn to just thinking about the guideposts of mastery, and this is a situation that you can't control. And I totally get how frustrating that must be. I don't have a good answer other than this is, I think, a situation of, lack of control, and that's so hard. And it's your situation sounds incredibly challenging, and I'm really sorry.
And find something you can control in your life. I don't know what your hobbies are, crossword puzzles or jigsaw puzzles or exercise or music. You need something you can control, but you cannot control the dementia.
And I would suggest also there are a lot of trainings for dementia friends and becoming dementia champions, which give you some really good tangible skills of dealing with somebody with dementia. And a lot of them are online now. So that's also another suggestion.
Excellent.
It will be the first anniversary of the 24 years my son died of brain cancer on October, and he just had his 25th birthday this past Monday. What are your thoughts on managing these special days?
Well, I think you have to be aware that on these special anniversaries, you might feel sad again, and you may have some tears again. And if it's 20 years ago, it doesn't matter. We do not get over loss. The Kubler-Ross 5 stages, even she denied them when she was dying and in her later books. So it isn't a neat thing. We live with loss. We do not get over it, but we have to find meaning and hope despite the loss. So try to do something uplifting on the day of the anniversary, but also feel the sadness. Again, it's both and. It's okay to feel sad and have tears years and decades later, and try to do something in honor of the person who died that is uplifting. Good luck to you.
Yeah, good luck. I'm so sorry.
Caring for a partner of 47 years, how can I hold hope when the reality is I must not have expectations of great changes in her behavior that she is incapable of accomplishing? What can I legitimately hope for and hold on to?
I assume this person has dementia. Okay, so assuming that your hope is not, your hope is for yourself, for surviving this, for having some life to live in honor of the person who is terminally ill. You might also hope that they have a painless journey, which I'm understanding there may be some truth in that the greater pain is for those of us who observe our loved ones fading away. So I would switch the hope, because you can't hope for the disease to go away or get better. So I would change what you hope for, that you will find something to live a good life after this person is gone, and in a way that will honor them.
I agree.
So caring for a partner of 40, I'm sorry, can you address humility as a necessary part of caregiving?
What do you think, Kathy?
I mean, I think it goes back to control and accepting the fact that it's a situation that is beyond your control. It is what it is. Yeah, I think it's really looking at it. Don't you think it's really from that control standpoint of like, you have to let go. You have to let go. You can only do what you can do.
And if the questioner means humility more in the idea of Native Americans and harmony with nature, I would say go for it. That's a good one. You'll have less stress. But I'm not quite sure how you mean the humility. If you mean I'm not worth much here, then there needs to be a way you can find some self-worth. This journey is too difficult to go through it without self-worth. You need to have some self-esteem and self-worth, but you can also have that with humility. In fact, the humility that I can't fix it is in fact a good stance.
So my husband's Parkinson's symptoms are changing our relationship. I am feeling the loss of us, but I don't know how to move forward in a positive way. I miss the way we were.
Grief is needed. You need to grieve that. It is going and gone. If you don't recognize that and cry over it, be sad about it, it'll come out as anger, and you don't want that with the person you're caregiving.
How do you caregive for a spouse without losing your whole life to the project? My husband has early onset LBD and could be like a 5-year-old for decades.
I think this is where you need to lean into the support groups and lean into the things that give you joy when you can. You don't obviously want to lose yourself in this because this is a rabbit hole. I think it's different when it's a spouse versus a parent sometimes. But I think from what I've seen with friends of mine who are spouses, caregiving spouses, it was really finding those moments, whether with their grandchildren or their children, friendships, and also their psychological family whenever possible. And I think that's in part why, we kind of created the Central Phoenix Advocates for Dementia Awareness, which was the name of our group, was to create a new, well, for us, I mean, our loved ones had passed, it was to find an identity. And maybe that's what you're asking. And, Pauline could speak to that, the identity. Who am I?
A new identity. You may be somebody who's looking for new opposite sex friends. If in fact that's the case, you again do both and thinking. Friends and visit my loved one who no longer knows who I am. You have to do both, but it's perfectly all right to go out to dinner with other friends, to have a social life. You've got to have a social life. Now, of course, I'm making an assumption here, and that is that you can afford to pay for someone to take care of your loved one while you do this. So I don't mean to be callous about that. But if you can't afford to pay for someone, I would enlist other family members, and I would be more directive about that, because families love to delegate this to one person. And you need to call a family meeting, have a family therapist help you if you need that, and say, look, we're going to divide up the jobs here because I need some free time.
So I'm also asked to make sure that we encourage you to enroll in Finding Meaning and Hope through Duet. It's free and available for caregivers dealing with ambiguous loss. And we're not going to get to all the questions, so I'm going to go ahead and give you one more question. I wonder if caregivers may be affected by post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, I feel like they are, don't you, Dr. Voss?
Yes, it's a different kind of trauma. You're not out there among the guns and the firing and the bullets of a war, but you are fighting a terrible disease. And on top of that now, the coronavirus. So you're more isolated than ever. Some of the things that cause trauma are feeling immobilized and also isolated and also in danger, which now you're also in danger from the virus if you do certain things. And your loved one is definitely in danger because they have a terminal illness. So you need to know that the trauma can affect you, but you can also intervene to prevent it. And what they do at Duet will help you do that more than anything else I can recommend.
So I've been told we can stay on just a few more minutes longer to try and get to the rest of the questions. Dr. Boss, can you please talk about the importance of reinventing oneself?
You know, you're all too young probably to remember Margaret Mead, the anthropologist. She was one of two women when I was a young girl that I could emulate. Eleanor Roosevelt was the other one. There weren't many women in the public eye. But she said that we have to reinvent ourselves every 10 years, every decade. And I've come to believe that's true. You know, there was a young girl, I was a student, then I was a young married girl, then I was a mother, and then empty nest. You know, you can go through your own life. And now when you're caregiving, boy, that's another reinvention. Who am I now? I was a reluctant caregiver. I didn't want to be called that. I didn't even know I was doing it, but that's what I was. But it wasn't the only thing that I saw myself as. I still wanted to be a writer. And you'll have to plug in your own identity. Maybe you're an athlete, you want to go run or something. Maybe you're a good cook, whatever it is. You've got to have something else. When people say, who are you? You can't just say caregiver. I would like you to be able to say at least one other thing that gives you joy to balance that. And so it isn't exactly reinventing, it's adding to the identity of caregiver. And once you're done caregiving, which I noticed, there's nobody to give care to anymore, they've died. You have to reinvent yourself again. I remember the first time when I had to check the widow box in a form I was filling out. I didn't like it. I didn't like checking that box, but I've come to accept it. But it certainly is not my only identity. And it shouldn't be yours either. So have multiple identities. It's a safeguard. It's resilience.
And I think also don't let people put you in that box. I think, you know, for me, it's very easy to be, at the time, Margarita's daughter. I'm now Violet's mom. Most people don't know my name anymore. But you do not need to give anyone permission to put you in the box. If you don't want to, I feel funny being referred to as a caregiver because my mother wasn't in my home. So I don't like, you know, I don't like that. But I'm in control of my story and who I am and my identity, as are you. And I think you have every right to shape your identity and to define yourself.
Yes.
Excellent. And I've also been asked to say that Finding Meaning and Hope is virtually, so you don't have to be in Arizona to be able to participate in the Finding Meaning and Hope. So another question, I've been caring for my mom who has Alzheimer's and vascular dementia for several years. I'm experiencing the ambiguous loss of my mom and our relationship, but I realized recently that I'm also mourning the loss of myself. As my mom's needs become more and all-consuming, my own life slipped away without my even realizing it. Can you address this feeling?
Oh my, I have to tell you, that's exactly what happened to me. I didn't know who I was anymore. So know that that's normal. That's slipping into it deeper and deeper and you've lost yourself. But the fact that you're asking the question means that you are aware of it. And that's the first step, being aware of the problem so you can cope with it. And so as you know you're losing yourself, take a grip on that now and do something for yourself. Make some connections, join a duet group, whatever you can. Do something to grasp yourself back. Because if you let it continue this way, you'll do more damage over time and your health may give way. So grab yourself back, okay? Pull yourself back and say, I can be both a caregiver and this, but find out what this is, okay? Good luck to you.
So my mom's only sister has cut all contact with me basically when I moved my mom from Iowa to Arizona so she could be close to me at a memory care facility 6 years ago. I feel angry at her, but I've reached out many times. I'm so sad at how most of family and friends have turned away from mom's Alzheimer's.
You know, there are family therapists in every state of the union. And all you have to do is Google AAMFT, American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy. Put in your zip code and they'll tell you who they are. You don't need a psychologist for this. You need a family therapist who can deal with conflict and also exactly what you're describing, where you don't get the help you need. And they're very good at this sort of thing. That's what they're trained to do, work on interactions in families. I recommend it highly. And you should not be left to do this alone.
I think it's a difficult one. I mean, I know you're not alone. Families, it's not uncommon. And I think Pauline is right. You should not be left to do this on your own. I think that's where it's important to find that person to talk to though, because I experienced something similar and it's hard not to be angry about it, especially if the family is casting judgment or shame or anything like that. It's really hard to being very critical of what you're doing when you're just doing the best you can to survive. Yeah, that's really difficult. I think when you start talking about family dynamics and their family members who choose to step away, it's painful. It's really quite painful. I also know that you're not alone in that situation, but I think talking to someone and finding others, but also I'd say the work is trying to let the anger go. It's something that I've had to work on because it's really easy to go down the path of resentment.
I agree. I agree with that, Kathy.
Okay, I'm going to try to get to these last 3 questions. I'm giving care to my wife with Alzheimer's, who is only 65 years old, and she gets very angry and nasty at least twice a day, and at times it lasts 24 hours. I feel I deal with it fairly well, but I also feel hurt and angry inside myself. Most of her anger is directed at me, so it's very hard for me to not feel hurt, angry, and frustrated. But I end up feeling very guilty for the way I feel because I know it's not her, it's the disease. Any thoughts to help me with the thought pattern?
Oh, you desperately need to have somebody else, as Kathy said, a psychological family, a duet group, a friend, a pastor, whatever. You need somebody else to talk to who is not diseased and who can talk to you in a normal fashion. Please find someone else to balance that, because that cruelty coming toward you may not change. And if by the way it continues, you may have to think about placement, because a human being can only take so much, and you may be getting to the end of that. But meanwhile, try to talk with someone else to get a reading on this, and someone who can speak logically and in a healthy way.
I agree. I think if you can reach out. Dana, did this person say that their mother had Alzheimer's or FTD or?
No, it said his wife has Alzheimer's, who's 65 years old.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I think if you can find support, I mean, certainly those types of behaviors are probably not uncommon. And I think finding others who've experienced that as well, through the Alzheimer's Association, through Duet, through the AFTD, the upside to COVID-19 is that so many support groups are now virtual. And so you can find connections, support groups that you might connect with, that you might resonate with in other states, for instance. And they're very specific, some of these groups. So I think that might be useful too.
Yeah. Human
So
connection.
My mother has moved into memory care and is adjusting to her new world. I am challenged to understand what to expect and what to ask about standard procedures for helping mom engage her care and helping her accept where she is. What advice would you offer?
Oh, well, I would advise to stay away for a few days and maybe a week or two, because the people in the care unit are pretty good at doing exactly what you were thinking you should do. Let her get acclimated to the group and ask their advice, the people there, what they would like you to do to help. Maybe it is for you to come and visit daily right off the bat. Maybe it is not. But I would try to fit in to the context of where she is now. So I would ask their advice of what you could do.
I agree. Ask the questions. Don't be afraid to keep asking questions. You are paying them and you have every right to understand how their process, their procedures, how they work, and where you fit into that, because you are still part of the care team. You are, if you plan on continuing to visit, you're part of the solutions, I think. I think you can also start, something I tried to do, it wasn't always successful, but because my mom was sometimes difficult, but at least in 2 instances, I connected with other family members. And I think that's a good idea, just to kind of get a sense of, you have a connection with somebody else. So when they're visiting, maybe they'll peek in on your parent or your loved one. But also they might give you some information that maybe you didn't get from the facility.
It's a good idea. Good idea.
And I would just add one thing is she should have a care plan, an individualized care plan, and they should be able to share that with you.
Yes.
And so that
from
would
the
also,
facility.
Yep.
Yeah. Great.
And the last question is, have you seen Alzheimer's patients who are not adapting to memory care over 6 months successfully return to the home setting?
I've never seen the patients, because I'm not a medical person, only the family members. But I have seen cases where the family member doesn't collaborate with the care unit and pulls the patient back. So be careful. Are you pulling the patient back to the home because you need it or because they need it? Be very careful about that. It also may be a financial issue, which puts it in a different realm. But the ones that I worked with, the person pulled the patient back to the home because they had no other role than caregiving and they needed that. That's why a caregiver needs to have a different identity in their pocket, because once they are not doing the day-to-day care, they're going to feel as if they're useless. I don't know if that's the case here. So let me just say that we have to re-examine ourselves and our own motives in that. It should be for the benefit of the patient. That may be keeping them there, because if you bring them home, you could die before they do.
I've only heard of one situation, and this individual had younger onset. What the spouse told me, this was years ago, the husband had a younger onset and was really struggling because a lot of the individuals who are on this particular memory care unit were older. And the spouse made the decision to bring her husband home, but she did find another setting because she also had young children at home. So she couldn't manage the care of her husband who had early onset Alzheimer's and, children who I think one of them was 10 at the time. So it was a matter of finding a different setting, I think, that was more appropriate.
Good, good.
So
Caregivers,
again,
I just wanted to say, you caregivers are the most precious resource in this country. Value yourselves.
agreed. Again, thank you to our silver sponsor, Arcadia Pharmaceuticals, and our copper sponsor, AARP Arizona, and our media partner, Next Avenue. Thank you to Pauline and Kathy for sharing your professional expertise as well as your personal experience. And thank you all to your participation and valuable questions. We hope you can apply today's inspirational concepts to lighten your load. We will also be sending a recording of this event within a few days, so you will get that if you missed any of it or you had to log off early. If you have not taken the survey, please do. We really do read every word. The links are in the chat. So thank you so much, and this concludes this session.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Dana. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you, guys.